Hello and welcome to the CSN3M Mindset Monday podcast. I'm Andrew Wade with Case Specific Nutrition. On this channel, we focus on the 3M's: mindsets, myth busting, and mentoring, all as they pertain to health and nutrition. This channel is brought to you by the OptiLife Academy, Case Specific Nutrition's very own online do-it-yourself wellness course. With 20 modules filled with short videos and action sheets, OptiLife Academy is designed to keep you engaged and excited about developing healthy habits that last. Be sure to check out the free trial at optilifeacademy.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. You can use code Andrew at checkout for 10% off your purchase. On today's episode of CSN3M, we are going to be discussing food rules. And I want to start by referencing a few podcasts we've had in the past that might be worth listening to that further develop this thought. It was the grading podcast. It was the ABCs podcast back about 3 or 4 months ago. And then also the growth mindset podcast featuring Lane Greenewalt that also happened a couple months back. Both of those podcasts have information that further reinforce some of today's thoughts. But I thought that it would be a really, really good opportunity today to take a little bit of time and think through the purpose of rules in general in our lives, how they govern us, what their purpose is, and then also recognize the dysfunction that they can cause if we choose to think of them inappropriately, and then how we can go forward as individuals with a much better sense of self and purpose and direction using rules or some other synonyms and maybe perhaps some less harsh language in trying to better support ourselves, which will bring us into some of the more non-diet approaches that currently exist in the world of nutrition and health and well-being. So, like I said, if you haven't already, be sure to take a listen to the grading podcast and the growth and mindset podcast, both of which can be really useful. And you don't need to listen to them before this one. It's not a prerequisite, but they will definitely continue to support this conversation. So I wanted to start by taking a moment to think about what the purpose of a rule is. And before we go into ourselves as individuals, we can kind of think big picture, the purpose of a law within society. And really the purpose of laws, whether it's in society or the purpose of rules that are in schools or even the rules that exist on boards outside of parks or in ice skating rinks or in various public and community facilities. The goal of those is to create safety and to help navigate problems or issues or obstacles that might be faced. We've created rules as a community so that we can support one another in trying to conduct ourselves in a way that doesn't negatively affect others, and also to conduct ourselves in a way that doesn't negatively affect us. And so at base, the goal of rules and laws are meant to be a cheat sheet, right? What we've learned in the past, and let's jot those down in bullet point format so that we remember or know how to conduct ourselves going forward. This is obviously a very positive thing, but as we look both from a big picture societal perspective and even go down into smaller communities and then as individuals and even within families, we can see that rules and laws oftentimes lead to negative outcomes. They lead to backlash, they lead to rebelliousness, they lead to fighting, they lead to negative behavior. And something we need to remember or recognize there is that there's a dichotomy that exists that we ourselves have a choice to control. And it's all in how we phrase them, pose them, and also utilize them. We can see rules in our life that we seem to be very accepting of and very automated by. Most people don't think about the fact that they put on a seatbelt when they get in a car. Most people don't think about the fact that they put on pants and a shirt and shoes when they walk into a restaurant. There are a lot of things that we do on a daily basis that we just accept as best interest or best effort or best practice and then move forward. And where this becomes very interesting and personal is when we start to investigate how food rules affect us. And what we can see is that there are some people who abide by their own food rules. And then we have people on the other side that really seem to struggle with food rules. And I think in part we can see that it might be why the rule is put in place, how the rule is phrased, and then also how many rules there are and why they were put in place in the first place. And so this is really where we can move forward, is thinking about and observing a couple different examples. And so what I want to look at is, instead of focusing today on the way society tends to do this, which is we tend to blame, motivation, or we blame willpower, or we blame our own self-discipline, I want to instead look and investigate why rules may in themselves set us up to succeed or set us up to rebel. And notice I use the word rebel instead of what most people think of as the opposition of success, which is failure. And it's because I don't ever truly believe that, especially in the world of food, that failure is a word that makes sense. I don't think it's a word that needs to exist within the language of trying to better understand self. And so let's start with some basic ones, because as long as we've paid attention to food and nutrition and diet, there have been quote unquote food rules. And what's funny is, just like in society, where the general idea behind the rules were best practices that set you up to succeed, over time, for many people, rules have evolved into rebelliousness and negativity in a sense that they start to call out the things that people are either fighting doing, not doing, or feeling false obligation to do. And you see a lot of posts now on social media where we say, hey, we don't need to follow rules. Instead, we can follow guidelines. And the reason the word guidelines tends to sometimes sit better with people is because it emphasizes that there's no need to have a punishment if a guideline is not followed. What is a guideline? A guideline is a best practice. A guideline is something that we know supports us. It has less negativity, where we are raised in our society to fear rules or to obey rules. And we are also taught that there are consequences for rules. And that's why I said the ABC's grading podcast would be a useful one to think about, because that's one I call out where we are even academically trained to fear, pass, and fail as sort of a framework in our mind, as a way to make us think that we are destined to either be good or bad. And the growth mindset helps us understand that that is not the case. We are able to succeed, and in the cases where we don't succeed, we are able to learn and grow and develop and reflect and find success. And so that's why I said the word failure really does not work in this conversation, or really in anything when it comes to your health and wellness. Instead, we have success, which is doing things that feel good and support us well, or its opposition, which is we are continuing to learn to better be in tune with ourselves and support ourselves. So for many, the idea of guidelines is a good way to kind of interrupt that rigid rule mindset, where rule means punishment if broken, guideline means best practice that we know feels good. Whether you pick the word rule or the word guideline, or whether you're somebody that doesn't want to choose a word in general, we can see across the board the entire intention of tips or tricks from the world of health and wellness and nutrition is to give you insights into what you can do to feel your best. So for example, I know myself personally, as well as many other people, will get heartburn if I eat dinner too late at night. And so for me personally, I try and give myself a guideline of eating dinner at 7 o'clock. And that's not a rigid rule that has a consequence. I'm not going to get arrested if I eat dinner at 7:30. I'm not a failure if I eat dinner at 7:30. But generally speaking, as a best practice, I know that the more often I eat dinner a little bit earlier, the less often I get heartburn, aka the better I feel. And so it's a worthwhile thing to keep in mind. Notice how there's no judgment in any of that commentary. Notice how it has nothing to do with passing and failing. Notice how days where I get home late from work and I eat at 9 p.m., there's no forced feelings of guilt or shame or chastising. There's no reason to emotionally downtrodden or punish myself. But instead, it's just a reminder of, hey, I usually try and eat around 7. One, because that's usually when I get hungry. And two, I tend to digest better, and given my bedtime, it supports me feeling better. So I actually have an appetite in the morning and can eat breakfast, and I don't get heartburn, which is obviously very uncomfortable. And so when I don't hit that 7 o'clock guideline, it's a chance to reflect and go, what's holding me back from this? Or what circumstances set me up so that I ended up eating a little bit later today? Was it that I wasn't hungry? Was it that I was too busy? And in that case, am I doing a poor job of self-care, right? Does that mean I need to take a moment and address my surroundings and better balance out my week so that I can support myself in a better way? Once again, we can see a guideline sets us up to really flourish and also better move forward. And to be honest, I think in many ways, using the term rule, while it can have a negative connotation, really does mean the same thing, right? Rules are not supposed to make us fearful, but because of how our society works, because of how we are primed as young people to understand that to break a rule is to have a consequence, we start to fear what the consequences are. And that feeling of fear is what often leads to guilt and shame and other negative emotions, which is something that we tend to do when we're trying to say that we know we did something wrong. But that's not the goal of tips or tricks or guidelines in the world of food. Our best practices, the things we note for ourselves, the things that dietitians will oftentimes help point out with clients, are not meant to create feelings of guilt and shame. Instead, they're meant to give us an anchoring point, a reference point, so that we can quickly keep in mind some of the things that help us. Because as humans, that's how our brains work. Our brains are known for being fearful. It's how we've protected ourselves and anticipated dangers. But as a result, we're known for creating quick lists, tip sheets, and experience. That's why we created language. That's why we started to write things down, was so that we could record experiences so that we could learn from our history. And so in many ways, a lot of the nutrition tips that exist started off as a guideline that an individual found for themselves. And that's where I dug into this a little bit in some of my discussions about diets and the similarities that all diets that exist have. And it's because a lot of people have had experiences and have guided and then written down what they've found to be useful, things that they've noted for themselves to help navigate. And it's why you commonly see the tip of eating dinner at an earlier time instead of a later time. Some people find that that helps prevent them from snacking. Some people find that it helps make sure that they prioritize and cook the meal. Some people find that it helps set them up to not have reflux, like in my case. So there's a lot of reasons why that general tip or trick exists. But where we go wrong is we become detached from the why. And so something I would encourage you to do for yourself individually is take some time today to write out some of the food rules that you think you may have set for yourself. Some of the tips or tricks or guidelines, the things that you say, oh, so-and-so told me this was a good thing, or I was told this is a good thing. Start to outline some of the things that govern your day-to-day choices, your day-to-day perceptions, and see if you can explain to yourself why that helps you. What does it actually do for you? What is the value in that tip or trick? Because if there is no real value that's genuinely connected to you, not value that you've been told you should have, but instead value that you physically can have, you're going to start to resent that guideline because it's not actually applicable to you. And if you resent that guideline, you're going to look to rebel against that guideline, as is human nature. When we don't agree with something, we rebel against it. And in that rebellion against that guideline, you are going to start to betray it. And then you're going to start to fight and internalize, which leads to oftentimes feelings of this cycle that people get into where they force a guideline or rule on themselves, and then it's not applicable to them or it's not important to them. And then when they don't follow it, they feel guilt and shame as a form of punishment. But to be fair, if a guideline is actually a good guideline, there is no need to punish yourself, for there is supposedly an already notable consequence that exists. So for me, with my eating dinner earlier, which I bring back as a personal example repeatedly because I counsel in the evenings until 9 p.m. And sometimes it's very difficult for me to get a dinner in a timely manner. But why is it difficult? Well, I self-inflict a very intense and long schedule on myself. And so, no, it's not difficult to eat at 7, but I use personal excuses to be busy, counsel people, go from consult to consult, and as a result, sometimes do not give myself the self-care that I need. And what is the consequence of that? Oh, I get heartburn. And so I don't need to have guilt or shame as a manufactured consequence of missing something that I've noted as helpful to myself. Instead, I know why that guideline exists. I know the consequence of, there's a reason why that guideline existed in the first place, right? I created it for a reason, and that reason does not need to be supported by guilt or shame, but instead, not following the guideline could serve as a simple reminder of, hey, you have heartburn, or even further, hey, your self-care is important. Your body is misbehaving because you are not giving it the care it deserves. This is a kind reminder that, hey, you need to do this for yourself. And if you don't do this for yourself, you're not going to feel your best. So hopefully an interesting topic. And like I said, I want to make sure everyone that listens takes some time today to actually pay attention to your own rules or guidelines or tips or tricks. Sorry for Axel in the background. But take some time today to write out some of the guidelines that you follow and try and parse them out. Try and see if they actually have value to you. If you can actually identify why that rule or guideline is in your head. And then from there, keep in mind that there's no need for there to be the consequence of guilt or shame or patronizing negativity, because if that rule or guideline exists to support you, it is simply a reminder that you deserve to support yourself. And I hope that's something you're willing to listen to again and truly think through again. Because what this does for us, if we take a step back, is it allows us to start to navigate our own health in a much more positive way. Instead of having this fixed mindset where we blame our self-discipline and blame our own ability to motivate ourselves, we start to instead seek to better understand ourselves. Instead of trying to force rules because you read an Instagram post that had 5 tips, or because you heard so-and-so lost 20 pounds and this is what they did, if we instead try and build guidelines based on our own experience and build guidelines for ourselves to help us accomplish things and navigate things in a positive way, we can once again, on the other side, start to see ourselves feel more positive and start to see ourselves learning and growing. And instead of trapping ourselves in cycles of negativity and criticism, we start to develop ourselves in a place of positivity, personal development, and as a result, become more connected with what we're actually trying to accomplish. This is a simple way to use a growth mindset to break the mold of grading ourselves, of saying pass and fail, of saying good and bad, and instead of saying best practice and why that best practice exists for us as an individual. And it's fun because as a dietitian, one of the things that I do with a lot of my clients is I always say that I don't prescribe diets. I help people navigate their own diet, which is to say that pretty much every diet that exists is a prefabricated list of guidelines that says, follow these because someone did it once and it had value to them. Well, instead of following what someone did for them, why don't we spend more time developing and identifying what we need to do for us, given our schedules, given our goals, given our stresses, given our weaknesses? What can we do to better support ourselves? I know for me, one of the main things I need to always remind myself of, and I recalibrate this time and time again, is I need to make more time for myself so that I can actually eat a real meal. I can actually sit down and eat the food and chew the food and enjoy the food and taste the food. And when I do that, it interrupts my stress, it organizes my mind, it allows me to feel more full and more satisfied, it makes me less tired, and it makes me feel more refreshed at the end of the week. In addition to all of those things, it also allows my digestive tract to thrive. So instead of having indigestion or reflux, my digestive tract works really well. And once again, you can hear where that guideline is a great guideline. It's a good reason to stay in tune and make time for my eating, particularly as someone who works in the evenings, so I don't have a bunch of free time available. But I must prioritize that so that I myself can feel my best. And there's no world where utilizing guilt and shame and criticism is conductive or productive. Instead, I'd much rather conduct myself from a place of learning and reflection and growth, knowing that I'm getting pulled a million different directions, and there are going to be exceptions, and there are going to be times where I get into a rhythm where I'm going a million miles an hour, and that is to be understood and accepted. But the challenge is, if I get better and better at prioritizing myself appropriately, I will feel the benefits of that, and I will get farther from the natural consequences of that. So the hope is that we can learn from the times we don't succeed, and instead of blaming discipline or willpower, engage in growth practices to better support our own ambitions, and also make sure that the tips and tricks and notes and guidelines that we're using to navigate our food, our lives, and ourselves are not based on practices of other people and done because we think we have to, but are instead built and developed based on our own needs and our own best practices so that we're in tune with why they exist. I'd like to thank you for taking a listen to today's podcast and listening to our podcast each week. Please subscribe to our channel if you have not done so already, and share on your favorite social media, tagging a friend or a loved one. Don't forget to do your part in our ambition by hashtagging #SpreadTheHealth. For more case-specific content, follow us on all social media at Case Specific Nutrition, and check out our website, casespecificnutrition.com. We will be back next week with another CSN3M Mindset Monday. This is Andrew Wade signing off.